What's happening, Power Painters? Taylor Payton here of PowerPainters.org as well as TayPayArt.com. And today I am happy to announce that I'm bringing you guys a new painting tutorial. Some of you who have been with the channel for a little bit, or since its inception, I guess, about 2-ish years ago, 2.5 years ago, you'll know that I started off with a drawing tutorial featuring like this lion-esque character. And I wanted to kind of go back to that since I'm sort of coming back to Power Painters after a long kind of half a year run of freelance and kind of working on my craft so I could come back and bring you guys a bunch of new techniques and tactics and tips for art because you can only give what you have. And I felt at that point in Power Painters I had given most of what I had. I mean, through the beginner drawing course, the beginner painting course, and all that good stuff, I feel like I had exhausted my reservoir of knowledge and I needed to go and grab some more in order to actually have enough to give out again because it kind of forced me to level up. And so this tutorial, it's sped up about 300%, so that's 3 times faster than you're seeing me paint it. The full painting took about, I want to say 2 hours. Yeah, about an hour, 45 minutes, so 2 hours roughly. And like I said, I just wanted to get back to this lion guy who was in one of my earlier tutorials about, an easy, simple way to begin digital drawing and painting. Now, this one, it's going to be fairly straightforward. I start with a drawing as you see me doing here, and I just like to edit and kind of move stuff around in my drawing until I'm happy with it and happy enough to begin painting. Though as you begin to lay in your flats or your underpainting, you will see that you're going to want to fix some things in your drawing that you didn't see before, because if it's just lines and contours, it's kind of hard to read, especially if it's sketchy and you didn't go over it a second time. But we'll get to that in a minute. Right now, I'm still just laying in that drawing and trying to explore some ideas, like, do I want him to have these glowing orbs of power, or should he just be like a yelling lion dude? Like, what's going on? And I think I actually do nix the glowing orbs because I'm like, they don't really fit with the composition. Flip the canvas sideways, check them out, and I just was not feeling them, so I decided to get rid of those and have some action lines to remind myself that I want to feel sort of powerful. You can do that with just a few marks in a drawing. It's like playing a few notes on an instrument if you want a certain feeling. Like the relationship of the marks and the canvas will give you a certain feeling that you want to go for. So in this case, if I scribble some actiony marks around him, I'll know that it has to feel a little more dynamic, as though he's like just roaring and about to charge into battle or something. And his hands are out in sort of like a come on pose. And I wanted to really kind of capture the essence of that. So just those little visual reminders can help you a lot as you're doing your drawings. Now, for this drawing, I was referencing another very, very masterful artist. I mean, I'm not master tier yet. I've got about maybe 5 years to go of deliberate practice, but I am fairly adept. But the master I was referencing is Run Ja, and I guess you could call it, if you're more of an I guess the way that most people say it in English is Ruan Jia. Um, but either way, I'm not going to say it properly because I don't speak Chinese. But I will include a link to his work in the description box of this video just so you can check out some of his amazing, amazing paintings because they are absolutely phenomenal. And I just wanted to capture like the potency he had in one of his like beast character works. So I reference that pretty deliberately, and you'll be able to tell. But I change it up enough so that it's still mine. Like if you, I like to use musical analogies because it's something I also study. If you guys know like what chords are or like a certain key, it's like people use these themes and these basic elements, but we all use them differently. So for example, if you reference one of your favorite masters and you kind of don't take the thing too literally, but just kind of take what you want from it, then it becomes more yours as opposed to like, oh, I'm stealing. Because there's a way to take as an artist, without actually going overboard with it. Like if somebody can tell really, really easily, you probably did it wrong. But don't worry about that too much at this point. We'll talk about that in some later videos. So what you see me doing here is I just laid in a rough background after I was good with my drawing. I'm using a custom brush pack. It's the Power Painters Bushido pack. I think it's got about 30 plus custom brushes, and it's really, really useful. I use it a lot. I had to make some new brushes for myself because I was tired of using everybody else's brushes, but I'm like, these are pretty rad brushes. So there's a link to them in the description box if you guys are interested. Any of you guys who want to get the beginner painting course or the beginner drawing course, the brushes also come with those courses too. But you can just get the brush pack standalone at the Power Painters Gumroad store. This tutorial is included in its fullness, like its hour 45-minute fullness in that brush pack as well. So check that out if you like. So essentially what I've done is I laid in the background elements and I gave sort of a circle composition around him because I want to feel like he's in sort of a sphere of power, like you can kind of see his aura, and just good basic shapes to frame our characters work really well. And then you see me just erasing out some parts after I laid in a flat kind of color behind him. That is to just give him some form and some depth for the underpainting, and I keep it pretty monochromatic, meaning one-ish color. It's not all over the place. I just have some oranges and some yellows, and they're really kind of desaturated, so they're a bit pale. And that's a really solid underpainting color, so I like to use it quite a bit. I've watched numerous oil painting artists use it, and I think that's where I picked it up. But I know some digital artists do it as well, where after you're done with your drawing, you want an underpainting. If you're going to be painting something and not doing like flat cell shading or something, you just have a base underneath so that you can pull the form from it. It's like working off of toned paper. And after I have that basis, then I start painting opaquely on top of my painting. And if you guys have watched some of my other painting videos, which I suggest you check out on this YouTube channel, then you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just after the underpainting is laid down, then I begin to just do some opaque marks above it. So this is above the drawing, it's above the underpainting, and the purpose is to bring it to a fairly finished state as far as a painting goes. So you can call it the overpainting or the opaque painting on top. Because sometimes the underpainting tends to be a little more like a wash of color as opposed to like fully fleshing it out and making it feel thick underneath. So after, like I said, you get in a pretty good place with your drawing, it's always really nice to go on top of that underpainting, that wash with nice thick marks. Start working in the form. I like to start with the face because it's obviously the focal point of this picture. It's the most expressive element. It's what people are going to connect with. So as a rule of thumb, when you think about your focal point, that's the point you want people to connect with. And you want to discern your focal point in any image you work on. I mean, unless it's a study or something that doesn't have much of an illustrative purpose, then I highly suggest always thinking about your focal point and what it is to define it, to make it more fleshed out, to make it worthy of connecting with your viewers and holding their attention. But once you establish what your focal point is, then it's fine to kind of hop around the canvas a little bit. Sometimes when I'm working, I find that it's helpful to hop around the canvas and not just like render out one thing super detailed and then move to the next, just kind of bringing it all up together. And you'll notice for the duration of this video, this whole tutorial, I stay zoomed out the entire time simply because I had enough resolution on my canvas to work in a decent amount of detail. This is 2560 pixels by 1440, so 1440, and that's enough resolution to stay zoomed out while working and just keep it really really big picture. There's a lot to be said about just getting the composition down, getting the overall feeling, and having just enough rendering or finish to call it done. So it is a speed painting. Something that I would work on for 8 hours or more is what I typically consider a full painting, simply because that's a whole day's work, you know. Speed painting is more for demonstration purposes or just for fun or practice. Although I have had client work where they just want speed painting quality, so you give them that. Anyhow, you can see I'm working out a lot more color on the opaque painting because it's more about color nuance at this point. I'm still keeping it to those very kind of earthy tones, the greens, the blues, the oranges, and I end up just painting over that stuff anyway. But as you proceed, you'll get feelings on where to move and where to go with the painting. I'm not thinking to myself at this point, oh, these pauldrons are going to be X color and they're going to be X material. It's something I was just kind of going with along the way. And as you get more and more comfortable in any given craft, you'll be able to riff like that. You'll be able to just sort of improvise as you go, and you'll know immediately, or maybe not immediately, but sometimes you'll know right away if something's working, and sometimes you'll get a little further along and be like, this doesn't really fit with the rest of it. I'm going to change that. So just if you see me doing stuff that you're not comfortable doing yet, don't worry about it, because if you keep it up, if you keep working your craft, if you keep doing paintings and drawings every day that are deliberate in practice, meaning they have a purpose, you're not just noodling and zoodling about to get 10,000 hours or something, then you will start to feel more comfortable in what you're doing, and you won't have to plan out everything as much and stiffen everything up. You'll be able to sort of improvise a little bit like a jazz player, or like an actor who does improv, and that will allow you a greater degree of creative freedom. And that's one of the most fun things about any given craft, in my opinion, is just to have that creative freedom as you're moving forward. Yes, we need structure, and that's one of the reasons why I have this channel up, but we're always balancing logic and intuition. We're balancing the more planned and structured approach with the more free and emotional approach, if you will. Like, you'll get feelings that you can't quite put into words, but you'll have to translate into this is working and this is giving me a good feeling, or this isn't working and I know immediately that something is off and I need to like search the technical side to fix it. Lots of painting going on, just slapping down these marks. I'm moving relatively quickly at this point. Probably a little faster than I should if I were to critique myself. Just because you can tell things are matching up, but it's kind of a sloppy lay-in. I mean, I end up tuning it up to enough of a degree at the very end of the video, because there's ways you can clean stuff up at the end, even if some parts are a little, rushy. But since this is a speed painting, I'm not too worried about it. In a more relaxed setting, even if I'm working painterly or more loose with my brushwork, I'll still go slow. But even though this is sped up, I was moving pretty quickly at this point, because I sometimes you get like this rush of energy and it's hard to fight that when you're working. So I was just kind of going with it, and I end up having to do some cleanup, which is okay because the lay-in was there. And once you paint yourself into a corner enough times, you can kind of paint yourself out, to use one of Craig Mullen's analogies. You paint yourself into this place where you're like, I don't know if I can fix this, and then you keep working at it, and it's sometimes you belabor it, and sometimes you don't fix it. It ends up just terrible, and you got to start over. But if you do it enough times, you kind of know how to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, if you will. And I don't recommend learning that way, but it kind of turned out that way for me, just because I've been doing it for about 6 years, painting in Photoshop. So trust me, I've had to abandon a lot of paintings. So don't feel bad if you guys ever have to get to that point where you're like, wow, this is too nasty to fix, or I overworked this. It happens. And then you just start anew. It's part of the game. So what I've essentially done with laying all this in is I have a rim light to pop him forward even more. In the image here, in the upper right corner, the navigator of the screen, he reads as a thumbnail, and that is what I strive to keep throughout my whole artistic process. Is if it's looking good as that thumbnail, if it's looking good as that little like postage stamp size, then I'm winning in a sense. It's like sometimes that stuff doesn't hold up if you zoom all the way in. But for the most part, if it looks good big, if the big picture is good, then that's the most fundamental aspect, and that's what matters. So check your navigator often, and I highly suggest that if you don't use the navigator in Photoshop or whatever program you like to use, that you zoom out frequently so that you can check your big picture. It's like how John Singer Sargent would often, make a couple brush strokes or even one brush stroke on his canvas, and he would walk like 8 paces backwards in the room and then check it from that distance to know what his big picture was, to know how everything's kind of vibrating together. How are your shapes working together? How is your general layout? Is your composition still working with the new additions? Did that shape or that mark you make fit in with the marks around it? These are just questions you can ask yourself as you proceed forward and kind of like help you gauge your feeling toward the overall image, because the big picture has to work first and foremost. If you have all these beautiful details, none of them are going to save the big picture. So make sure that your large scale image, your composition, your large shapes, the overall feeling and general sense you're trying to convey is maintained throughout the working of your piece. Paint in the mouth, added some nails. And at this point, he's starting to kind of come to life, and I'm still, I've been painting on it on the face for a while, and that's why he feels like he has life, because enough detail has been added to that countenance, and that brings you in, because there's a lot of brushwork in his mane. There's a lot of form being discerned on his face. I've sculpted it quite a bit in regards to everything else around him. You don't see his pauldrons or his chest plate or his hands have this amount of finish, and yet the face draws you in enough to say, okay, there's starting to be a connection here. I'm starting to embrace this character in a way. I mean, I would not embrace the lion because it's obviously you don't want to mess with it, but you can actually start to bring the piece in. It's kind of a difficult thing to explain, but once again, if you go back to your focal point and you think about how your focal point is tuning everything around it, then if that focal point is working, then you're on a good track. At this point in the drawing, I kept looking up at the navigator, and I could feel that things were getting a little dark in terms of the value scale, maybe a little darker than I wanted for the overall values of the piece. Now, when I talk about the value scale, I mean the relativity of the lightest parts versus the darkest parts. And if the dark parts are too dark or the light parts are too light, you get these different effects that you're probably not going for. If you're going for a value scale, you have to understand the relationship from the darkest parts to the lightest parts and make sure that your dark parts are not too black, and especially too black and having no color, and your lightest parts are not too bright and having tons of color, because these are effects that it takes a lot of skill to use and leverage properly. And so I'm kind of flipping my layers on and off and checking like, okay, the values are getting a little too deep here. I'm going to need to start pulling it back upward in terms of the brightness. So if you imagine like a bar with like 10 squares, and they go from a pure black square to a pure white square, and you have every other square in between as like various shades of gray. You just want to start assigning those values to different elements in your picture plane in order to get them to read properly, because how we separate things in terms of our vision are, darks and lights. And I'm not talking shadow and light, I mean just like its base darkness versus its base lightness. So this kind of stuff I go into very deeply in the beginner painting course, as well as I touch on it as well in the beginner drawing course. So if you want to know more about values and have some exercises to help you understand and study those, then both of those courses are worth checking out. There's actually videos on the YouTube channel where you can see some of the beginner painting course and some of the beginner drawing course and understand these fundamental concepts that are so crucial for an artist to embody and have in their work, because this is how you're going to solve those technical issues that I mentioned earlier. When stuff comes up and you don't know how to solve it, it's most likely because you don't have the technical knowledge. And the technical knowledge is what gives you the information to actually express your inspiration. So if you're inspired to do something but it's not coming out and you get that disappointing feeling all the time, then it's because you probably don't know enough about the technical aspects to actually execute the thing that you're inspired by. So the technical stuff is how we solve the problems that are going to arise, like values, for example. If things are getting too dark, like, oh, that's my value scale. I need to bring it up in terms of lightness, or this is way too blown out. I'm going to need to drop these lights a little bit. And this is stuff you just pick up as you start studying and you take it more seriously, or more sincerely, I guess I should say, because the serious tone is, kind of like I'm not a big fan of going too serious. I think that that stiffens things up. But if you take it sincerely, then you really can start to feel out this information and seek it and begin to, like I said, embody it as an artist and learn it. So, going in back to the painting here, I'm kind of like going back and forth on rim light, seeing what parts I want to light, what parts I don't want to light. And I have rim lit enough characters to kind of understand what things I want to pop and what things I want to bring back. It may not be completely accurate as far as lighting goes, especially if you don't plan in advance, but these are just certain effects you get to understand and use as you proceed with your craft. So it's kind of that artistic license that we all love to use so much. And that bottom portion, I was not feeling the stripes. I'm like, they're a little distracting from the main image, so I kind of reel back on those. After defining the face, it's good to start defining everything around it because that's what's going to kind of radiate off. The face is going to be the focal point, and then the things around the face are going to need enough detail to uphold and kind of be in the same picture plane with the face if you're working on a character piece. So I start defining the chest plate, and that's what you saw me working on for all that time. It gives you more of that form and definition that the face is enjoying, but not as much detail and like fussiness and work as the face. And then after that, I know I definitely need to start hitting those pauldrons, those two big shoulder plates that he has, because they're not they're not up to the level that the chest piece and the face piece are up to. And I use kind of a cool time saving technique, which you're going to see in a second here. I had to give them some extra shapes on those pauldrons to kind of flesh out the silhouette a little bit more because the drawing was a little bit off. I could feel it was imbalanced on that one side, and I figure I would take the shapes of the claws and start to use them just for the pauldrons. So here's that technique I was telling you about just a second ago. It's where I copy a piece of something that's already fairly rendered out, and then I sort of use that as a basis, and I erase bits of it away on something else that I want to use. So since the chest piece was fairly finished compared to the shoulder piece, I copy and paste the chest piece into the shoulder, and I use some of that detail and that information, and I begin to render out the shoulder piece with that pre-established chest piece information. Not only does this create a cohesiveness between his set of armor, but it saves me time. So you can see I use the dodge tool as well to really pop the material. I want it to be more metallic and kind of have as much of a brightness as the eyes because then you can pop back and forth between the shoulder pieces and the highlights on the shoulder pieces as well as the eyes. So this is the kind of stuff that I'm doing kind of subconsciously and I'm only thinking about as I'm coming back to it here. I knew at the time I wanted a material separation, but I didn't know that I wanted it to kind of resonate with the eyes so much and pop the forms in that same kind of fashion. Once you've been working at something for a while, like I said, you'll start to get that sense of, oh, I'm doing things that I don't quite understand, but they're working. And like I said, that's a really fun place to be, and you'll get glimpses of it even in the beginning. So I'm really excited for all you guys out there because I can't wait to see what you come up with when you start to understand this kind of stuff and the feeling of channeling that energy, that like, whoa, I'm doing something I don't quite understand, but it's working is it's indescribable. So keep working your craft, guys. Like I said, I know I say it a lot, but sometimes people are watching these videos and they're like a little bit sad or a little discouraged. And I want you to understand that that's just part of the journey. It really is. All of us go through it. All of us have a hard time with it. Sometimes all of us hate what we make for a while. And it's just because your work hasn't caught up to your taste. Like the stuff you love is just really cool, and the stuff you're making is not as cool. And you just gotta like be okay with that gap and work where you're at and really become a master of what you have right now. Because if you use the most of what you have, then automatically you make those intuitional leaps where you'll be looking for information that'll allow you to get to that next level. So at this point in the pipeline of the painting, I have fairly finished shoulders, a pretty good, focal point face, and the chest plate supporting the shoulders and the face. So all these things are beginning to harmonize a little bit more so in terms of the overall pictorial finish, the composition, and I begin to work on the outer elements, which are the hands. Now, the hands, it's like these are easy to rough in and hard to finish and refine. So I end up not going like completely bananas trying to get those things done. I picked my battles when I started this image, and I just wanted to kind of have something that had a powerful at a glance feeling. Like you can tell his posture and you can get the general idea of the hands. So to get them perfectly technically accurate would have required, looking up lion hands, looking up people hands, and taking my own reference photos and all that. And for this piece in particular, I didn't want to go that far. So you, like I said, you kind of gotta pick your elements in your battles here. So just work on the parts that you know are going to be the most potent and important. And then, I mean, it's kind of a cliche that every artist kind of does away with the hands, but if they're immensely important, then you'll get them done. You just have to do a lot of hand studies and plan for them and know the gestures and get comfortable drawing them in a couple poses and all that good stuff. They're not terribly hard. They're only about as hard to draw as a head or a face. It's just a matter of knowing how they move and bend and knowing how the planes are going to take the light that is hitting the hands and stuff like that. But for the whole of this image, I was pretty satisfied with where they turned out. So I'm not trying to spend another hour, 2 hours finishing them up just because it's for the purposes of this tutorial. They weren't that paramount. However, it was good to separate them with kind of the forearm parts. So I end up doing that. At this point, since so much of it has pretty much been done, I figure it's time to start the cleanup process. And you typically want to get a clean silhouette, like fairly clean contours. So I end up merging everything that I have as far as the underpainting, overpainting, and my lion guy is just on his own layer now. So the sketch, the underpainting, the overpainting, all of it is merged. And I go ahead and start working on him as one layer because this just simplifies things. I can have a greater freedom on his contours and his edges. So if you see me going in and erasing and cleaning up certain elements like parts of the sketch that don't need to be there anymore, then that's the reason for that. Because it helps a lot to get a feeling of finish if it's clean, if it has that clean feeling. I'm not saying sketchy isn't sexy at times because it definitely is, but you kind of have to plan for it and work with it. People think, oh, I can just be sketchy and it'll look like I'm just being sketchy. But there's kind of the secret is you got to work for that sketchiness. You have to make the sketchiness work. So you can tell this is, I mean, I'm staying pretty loose in the painting. Just getting that big read for the thumbnail and for the overall solidity of the image, but I knew I needed some decently clean contours around my figure for that to actually hold up. I mean, in the beginning, you're working mostly on inspiration too, so unless you stay super clean from the get-go, then you're going to end up having to do a little bit of cleanup, which is fine. It's just part of the process. However, if you really hate that step, then just stay a little more meticulous as you begin your pieces of art and have layers that you can just discard if they are sketchy so that you basically eliminate that from your process if that's how you like to work. For me, I'm fine with some sketchiness, so it doesn't really bother me to clean it up. It's kind of a satisfactory feeling too, like, oh, look at it getting more finished, it's emerging. So cleanup is going to be part of almost any image that you do, but just be sure to kind of make peace with it. Because if you don't make peace with cleaning up, it's like when you don't really want to clean your room and you just throw everything in the closet or like put everything under the bed or whatever, and it just ends up looking, kind of clean, but there you can still tell there's some crappy parts. So this make peace with the cleanup. It's a good thing. And a lot of what I'm doing at this point is cleanup or just adding little details or finish or trying some things that may or may not work. Like a lot of what I like to do is make a whole new layer and just go in and try to alter something a little bit to see if I can get it to look a little cooler or a little better. And if I can't, then I simply just discard that layer. It's like, okay, let's try a few things. Let's get the feeling of if this is going to actually, if I can pull this off or not. And it's like, this shape is better the way it is, so let's just toss that. It's fine just to get rid of stuff a lot of the time. If it's not working, then just let it go. No matter if you worked on it for like 2 seconds or 2 hours. If it doesn't actually make the piece better, it's best just to release it and start anew in that sector. And that's just something we have to learn as artists is to, kind of, I say it a lot, or I have said it a lot in other videos, but it's the kill your darlings thing. And I got that from listening to somebody who wrote about going to a workshop where Jamie Jones was teaching. So if something is not the way we need it to be, then it has to go. It's just the whole needs to be the paramount effort of our piece. We need to consider the wholeness of the piece and if everything works together. And if one piece is not working with the other pieces, then it's got to get out of there. So at this point, I am still considering the whole of the piece. I'm kind of looking around for things to fix, things to make better, little elements to tweak and make them fit more cohesively into the whole. It's like if you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle and it's mostly together, but you're kind of like neatening it, like straightening it up and making sure all the things are flush, everything kind of has that place. It's a lot like that, keeping it really cohesive and tightening everything up, making sure all the bolts are as tight as they need to be, and that it's just going to stay cohesive as a whole. Working on the hands a little bit because we need to show the hands some love. I mean, you can't just let them go completely and stay 100% sketchy. We just need to define them enough based on our layout. And I keep always returning to the face. And at this point, there's things that I'm certain of and things I'm uncertain. That's why I have that layer above my base layer here, because I flip it back and forth kind of like an animation frame, because you're like, was this version better, was that version better? And as you're flipping it, you're looking at the different shapes you've created with the new brush strokes or the new marks that you've made. And so you kind of just have to gauge whether or not some of those are working. And if you make a new layer and you do several things, you got to flip it a couple times because you'll see that some things are working and some things are not. So as you flip it, you'll get a feeling, and you'll be like, okay, this one, erase on that layer and go back. Oh, that is working, I'll leave that alone. So a lot of what we're doing at this point is we're just getting to this place where we're, like I said, tightening everything up and just checking on what's working. We're considering all the elements and the whole of the picture. So defining the forearms a little bit, repainting a little aspect of the hand, just having a good time. He didn't look like a very good character to me, so I darkened the eyes, just make him look a little more evil, scary, whatever. Um, he is like a beast creature dude, and you could have him looking like valiant or majestic, but I wasn't going for that in the beginning, so I'm trying to emphasize what I already have laid in. And we're essentially just trying to make things clearer and clearer. So just push what you already have until it gets to that place where it needs to be. At this point, I knew I needed to go in and make some changes I could only make if he was completely separate from the background, because I needed to work on the background a little bit more for the wholeness of the piece, because it's kind of dead and dull in the back there. So what I'm doing is I'm going in with the lasso tool and I'm running the contour of my figure. I'm doing this as tightly as I can, and I evaluate my lasso tool afterwards, and I kind of chip away at the bits that aren't super tight. And I'll do a copy merge, which is Command Shift C or Control Shift C if you're on PC, and that copies everything no matter what layer it's on, and then you merge it down. And so now I have him opaque on top of everything, and the background is mine to just complete as I see fit. So I go in with some of my custom brushes and add some kind of leafy shapes, and I go in with an overlay layer and add some light, because not only does this give color nuance and bounce to the image, you can see it really vibrates nicely with the yellows of his skin to have a more chartreuse green behind him and give him more light. Then I go in with a color dodge layer and push that light even further. And this is on top of him, it's not in the background, so it actually gives him some more shine and some more presence and luster. Before, everything was kind of like toned down, but I'm adding these lighting effects to give it some extra oomph, some extra push. Like I said before, we want to just have those additional elements reading even better. Tweaking the curves up a little bit because once again it felt a little dark, so I'm just like pushing it up just a little bit, seeing those brights come up a little bit with the adjustment layer, and finalizing everything here. And that pretty much wraps it up for the line tutorial. I'm so glad to be making tutorials for you guys again. I'm glad I have the free time. It's just absolutely amazing to be able to come back and share all this knowledge that I've acquired, because I'm always excited to see what people do with it. You guys can always email me at pwrpainter@gmail.com. The link will be in the description box. And if you would also like, you can go to the powerpainters.org website and subscribe to the mailing list, because if you do, you get 2 free tutorials sent right to your inbox, and I give you updates when I make stuff like this in case you're not on YouTube a lot, or in case you don't follow Power Painters on social media. But yeah, really, thanks for watching, guys. Check out the description box for more cool Power Painters stuff. And if you guys want to give me anything in the comment box that is like, what you'd like to see more of or less of, just any feedback helps just immensely. So thanks again for watching, guys, and happy painting.